Good evening, everyone. This is Michael Malik here with the Hurricane Season 2020 update, part of the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion for September 2nd, 2020, recorded around 7:20 p.m. Eastern Time. Well, first of all, we are discussing Tropical Storm Nana, potentially soon to be potential Hurricane Nana, and this is again approaching Belize pretty rapidly. Again, this is the coast right here of Belize, and this is where our storm is right now. Again, there is still some shear being impinged on the storm. Actually, the direction has shifted more into the northerly direction now. Instead of being almost kind of parallel with the flow, it's now coming from the north, which is actually causing the shower and thunderstorm activity to be displaced down towards the south today, where most of the deep convection is. And you can actually see some of these overshooting tops right here from the deep convective thunderstorms that are developing. So the northern coast here, the northern kind of coast of Honduras, is certainly under the gun for some nasty weather, including mudslides and obviously gusty winds, heavy rainfall, etc. And in the portions of Belize here along the coast of eastern Belize, the threat exists for some storm surge, heavy rainfall, gusty winds, just overall nasty conditions. As again, this could be potentially a hurricane right before landfall, but the time is really running out. And we talked about how earlier this morning, if you guys, had seen the blog discussion that I did on Patreon/Twitter, that this isn't necessarily guaranteed to become a hurricane. So this does have a little bit of a shot, but you notice that it is really not well organized, although there is some pretty deep convection on the south side. So that's still going to bring some rough adverse weather to these areas over the next couple of days, really the next day or so. Adverse conditions are expected, and again, there will likely be some, gusty winds, heavy rainfall, mudslides, flash flooding, etc. And any of these bands here that kind of rotate around on the northern edge here, it has the potential to produce tornadoes. Anywhere within this right front quadrant has a chance for tornadoes, especially given a highly sheared environment. And here, it is entirely possible that we do try to get a couple of isolated spin-up tornadoes, but you can kind of see almost a west-southwest dive in some of this convection. Again, that's kind of some of this northerly shear being impinged on our storms, so it is helping to really limit intensification purposes this afternoon and evening. So that is certainly of good news, but still, you get under any of these showers and thunderstorms that are rapidly developing, you're going to have certainly some adverse weather. And, tropical storm conditions are almost right up along the coast already. Now we can see here the official tracks from the National Hurricane Center and all the rest of the spaghetti models. Again, right now, our storm as of 2 p.m. was out here off the northern coast of Honduras. Since then, of course, it's moved further west. But again, this is expected to kind of come in tonight and then be over Guatemala and Belize tomorrow. And then eventually some of the remnant circulation, potentially a mid-level circulation, because the low-level center is going to be destroyed over these mountains. But the mid-level center could drift on over into the eastern Pacific, where it may have a chance to regenerate here over the next couple of days. But the current profile of the atmosphere is pretty unfavorable out in here, so additional development will be limited, if any. Now we can see here as of 18Z, again, the scatter plots, this is really the marine surface plots. Again, our surface center is roughly in through about here, so it's moved further west as time goes on. And you can see those adverse conditions already along the coast here, certainly some gusty winds, 15 to 20 knots in some of these areas. Not too bad right now, but conditions will deteriorate as time goes on. And for what it's worth, this is the aircraft reconnaissance again. They have noted that there is some flight level tropical storm winds right off the northern coast or off the eastern coast here of Belize. And again, that is due to the fact that, again, our center of circulation is actually right in through about in here somewhere. It's kind of actually hard to depict where this low-level center may be. The recon plan is going to provide a better idea of where that is. But you can see here some flight level winds, approaching 40 to 45, 50 knots. So this will kind of be translating onshore as time goes on. Of course, as the system gets further off towards the west, it's going to draw up, more of that land friction. It's going to help to tighten a center down a little bit further and a little bit better, and that might help to induce a little bit of short strengthening right before landfall. So, an hour or two before landfall, this thing may try to tighten up and ramp up a little bit, which is why the hurricane warnings are subsequently there, just to make sure that if it's a hurricane, there's ample time. Regardless, storm surge is still going to be a problem. 3 to 5 feet of storm surge could certainly still be a problem. Flooding, gusty winds, etc. That is always significant and problematic threat. So for you folks down there, of course, that is something that you guys really want to take seriously. But out across even the northern areas here, if you live on, the western tip of Cuba, northern, Yucatan Peninsula, these far outer bands are going to be rotating in. And again, they could also produce some adverse weather. We are also watching a tropical wave right now near basically near Jamaica right now and south and east of Cuba. And this tropical wave does have some deep convection with it. It's going to also be moving off towards the west or northwest. So this is going to be something we're going to have to monitor to see if we get any sort of consolidation. You've got more area of convection out here, roughly associated with the far outer bands. But again, this is all kind of a loosely disturbed area of organization right now. Not really concerned about it, but it is something we're going to watch as time goes on, certainly as we progress throughout the next few days. So now turning our attention out to the rest of the tropical Atlantic, and for the remainder of this video we'll be focusing solely on 91L and what is soon to be Invest 92L and the complicated pattern that is going to be setting up from that. First of all, here taking a look at the IR satellite presentation from Invest Area 91L. First of all, you can clearly note the very sheared pattern. We have deep convection that is consistently being sheared off towards the north and west of the center. Again, the center circulation, our mid-level center, is in through here. And you can see the only convection is right now over the northern part, the northwestern part of this circulation area. So we don't have a well-defined circulation, and we also do not have a well-defined convective structure. And this will be this will remain sheared throughout the next several days. There is a strong pocket of upper level shear that's really going to be impinging on the system, and that only adds to what other complications we're going to be having over the next several days. You notice though, most of the convection in this area is generally being sheared off towards the west here and off towards the west and northwest. And this is going to be the general overall pattern, at least for the next several days, as shear is expected to remain high, and thus 91L is not going to have a good chance of consolidating, at least in the near term. We'll talk about some of the longer term, mid and longer term complications here in just a couple of moments. Now, first of all, the steering pattern is also sort of complicated. This is the 18Z early track guidance from 2 p.m. this afternoon. You can see that really we're just kind of wandering in this little area right here. We don't really have much of an area to say where this is going to go. The trade winds are very weak, only at about 2 to maybe 3 miles per hour off towards the west. And in some cases, like we're seeing right now, the center is actually drifting a little bit further off towards the east. Very weak trade winds across this area are known to produce some very erratic moving systems and tropical disturbances. This is in the overall package of the intertropical convergence zone. So this is kind of located along the monsoon trough, basically, the monsoon axis, and it is under a heavy amount of wind shear right now, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But generally, the models are all over the place with this kind of getting merged up with a potential merger with what is soon to be 92L. So this complicates the track even further, but right now there does not seem to be a land concern for the Lesser Antilles or Puerto Rico or whatever. So no need to worry on this right now. Now, the overall model guidance today really hasn't changed much in terms of the intensity. This is the early track guidance for 2 p.m. And you can see, a couple of models do bring it into that tropical storm range, but there's also several models here, including the CMCI, the multi-model consensus IVCN, the GEM model or the AVIN, the LGEM. all of these models suggest that this will not become a tropical storm, or if it does, it will wait at least for the next several days. And that seems to be in pretty good consistency with what we are going to be kind of lining up with in terms of the wind shear and overall environment. And we could take a look at that here in the ship's intensity guidance. And what this is basically a statistical and a dynamical model at the same time. It's basically like combining the HWRF model and the HMI model with something like the statistical models, the pure statistical models. So this is kind of a blend of both, and it tries to incorporate a bunch of different things. So what you're looking at here, first of all, we're going to take a look here at this wind shear value. And again, this right here, this is the time in hours. So you're progressing from 0 on the far left, the starting time, all the way out to hour 168 on the far right hand side. And this kind of lines up with everything else here on the screen. So right now we are actually sitting in a pocket of about 29 knots of wind shear. This is highly unfavorable, but the worst environment still awaits 91L. You can see that as we go on throughout time, the wind shear briefly decreases through the next 18 hours to about 26 knots before ramping up and staying ramped up through the next about 48 hours. So we start to see a big incline right again to allowing more shear. And it stays in a pretty modest shear environment through hour 84 through about the next 3 or 4 days before finally the shear drops off briefly before picking up again and then dropping off more substantially out here towards the end of the forecast on the ship's model. So the overall guidance basically is suggesting that the shear is going to be very hostile for at least the next 96 hours before we finally get a more substantial decrease in the subsequent shear values, and that should allow at least for some better consolidation. But the next real uncertainty is going to come in form of the 700 to 500 millibar relative humidity product. And this is right here, the 700 to 500 millibar relative humidity, where you can see right now values that are actually only in the mid to upper 50s. And we stay that way before dropping out even into the low 50s as we kind of progress throughout time. So we drop almost into 40s relative humidity, which is suggesting that we may actually see a complete collapse within the next 18 hours of any associated deep convection. If that happens, since we don't even have a system right now, this would likely weaken whatever mid-level spin is occurring right now, and thus could actually reduce the chances of this even becoming a tropical cyclone, whether it's a depression or storm, within the next 5 days, because we need deep convection to be able to persist. And the fact that we probably will not have that because of this lower relative humidity certainly means that the storm's chances, at least in the short term, for any significant development are likely going to be significantly hindered because of the shear and also the dry air. Now, after about 36 hours, we start to see a gradual increase into the mid and upper 60s, and then eventually by days 4 and 5, we start to get into the 70s dew points. So this is suggesting that we find ourselves in a higher dew point, higher relative humidity area, and we also find ourselves in a pocket of lower shear. Really, we'll kind of highlight that in red all the way throughout this time. So we find ourselves in a pocket of relatively lower shear, at least somewhat throughout this time. Now, shear values will increase beyond days 4 or days 5 and day 6, but days 7, 8, and 9, the shear values will now start to decrease even further, and that's when we could see, assuming this does not merge with soon-to-be 92L, this may actually have a more substantial chance then to undergo tropical cyclone genesis. Now, the only thing that is slightly limiting right now in days 8 and 9 is the relative humidity drops off once again from the mid 60s to low 60s. Now, it's not the same as the low 50s, so you'll still probably get some decent convection to build, assuming again this is still the same entity that it is now, and that it has not merged with 92L or soon to be 92L. But the general consensus is that the environment, the further you go out in time, generally speaking, the environment's going to have hiccups from time to time, but it gets generally more favorable on. So it seems like we will have a slightly more favorable environment. And you can see this land here in the kilometers does get pretty close to land. Right now it's still over 17,000 miles away from land, but this gets down to about 1,147 kilometers away from land. So it is getting closer to some landmass, but exactly where obviously remains to be the big question. The upper ocean heat content right now is in a pretty lackluster environment throughout its journey, at least through really the next 60 hours before substantially increasing really about on days, really by about days, 3 beyond to day 9, we start to see a more substantial increase in the upper ocean heat content. And remember, this is not a fast moving wave, so that's something to kind of keep note of. Now, the ship's rapid intensification parameters here suggest that even a 30 knot increase in 24 hours is only 9%, and that's 1.3 times the climatology mean of 6.9%. So the climatology mean generally is suggesting that we will probably not see any substantial rapid intensification. The parameters just aren't there. The shear values are not allowing. The relative humidity is not allowing. So by and large, this is not going to play a significant role in development, at least for the next several days. Now, I can never say never, but this will likely not have a chance to get better organized, at least for the next 3 or 4 days before the shear starts to decrease and the relative humidity starts to increase. So that is something we'll also be watching as we progress through time. Now, we're going to take a look here at some of the modeling, and just a quick disclaimer here, this is not necessarily to show the position of where a tropical cyclone or hurricane or whatever may or may not be within 5, 6, 7 days. We are going to look out beyond 5 days, but more so as a pattern recognition and help you understand the significant uncertainties that are playing into this right now, into all of our systems. So first of all, obviously we have Nana down here in Tropical Depression Omar. Again, we've touched on those in previous videos, but again, generally Nana is going to make landfall tonight and then move its remnant circulation into the eastern Pacific, generally speaking. Now we'll move out here to 84 hours, and again, you notice that in the GFS forecast model there is nothing going on right now. We do have a pretty strong ridge of high pressure, but it is getting eroded by a lot of this mid-latitude cyclone energy, and just a large piece of energy out here kind of eroding the piece of the ridge right here. And that is very important for what is going to set the stage later. Now we progress throughout time, we get to about day 5. So at day 5, we have a couple of interesting things here in the model field. First of all, at day 5, we have a little area of spin right here approaching the Lesser Antilles and also Barbados. Now, whether or not this is actually here on day 5 or whether or not this is just simply a model artifact remains to be the big question. However, this cannot be necessarily slept on, as the GFS model and all the other models did not see a Category 4 making landfall in obviously Louisiana, 5 days out or even a week out, And certainly for that matter, the GFS didn't even suggest that Nana would be actually even a thing until really yesterday when it had already formed. So the bottom line is that the models have done bad. We have to use a lot of discrepancy and our own kind of interpretation and observations to kind of decipher what's going to happen. But these models are not necessarily completely useless, because they can serve an important role in trying to depict what may happen down the road. So this is at day 5, and again, this is the 850 vorticity. This is the spin in the atmosphere at 5,000 feet, and these, what we're talking here, these higher red colors, that's your higher cyclonic spin at the 5,000 foot level. So you notice what could be a tropical cyclone here, one here, maybe something trying to form here, and maybe something here. Of course, that's stretching it a little bit, but we see at least 3 well-defined areas of circulation. Now, again, what actually ends up happening is you can kind of see where we have kind of this giant area of spin, and that tries to kind of consolidate, gradually kind of take over. And we go out here on September 9th, and again, you know, there's your one wave there, wave here, you know, tropical cyclone there, and a tropical cyclone there. Now, of course, you do have a big ridge of high pressure, but we'll kind of go out here on the 500 millibar geopotential height, and what we're looking at here is the strength of the high pressure at about 18,400 feet in the atmosphere, and these darker reds, that's your higher, basically your higher ridge strength at 18,400 feet in the atmosphere. So we'll kind of run this forward, and we'll move out here to about 120 hours when things really start to percolate. So you notice we do have a closed isobar here at about 1,008. We have one here, one here, one here. So we have multiple possible tropical cyclones somewhere in this general vicinity over 5 days. So we do have stuff to watch. But you can see that the ridge is now eroding further towards the north, but we have a very weak trade flow down here. So we have a very weak trade flow, but we do have a weakening ridge off towards the north. This ridge is now beginning to abate and subsequently move off towards the east and erode the northern and western side of the ridge. So what actually ends up happening is we'll kind of scoot this forward out to, you know, September 9th. Again, now you notice the strength of the ridge starts to build back in. However, we do have this area to the north that is kind of just kinked in through here, and you can see those isobars that are kinked, and we might have this wave right here. If it's moving north, this would be north of the Cabo Verde Islands. At this time, this would likely have a route out to sea. There is the chance that this would have an ultimate route on the path out to sea, and it would stay that way. So if we did get a storm to form north of the islands, north of the Cabo Verde Islands, which is here, which is right here, we might have a chance to see this move on out to sea. However, you can see our system down here, it's still trapped beneath this ridge, and it can't really do anything. It can't just move northward because this ridge is pretty strong. However, what is coming out of the Midwest and Canada, we have a trough in through here that's digging in. That is going to eventually move subsequently eastward and erode the western part of this ridge. So you can kind of see that happening, that the ridge now starts to get heavily amplified, and you have multiple tropical cyclones, at least on the model, a 600 decameter ridge of high pressure, but now you're getting this big trough digging in. So this is going to eventually try to undercut a lot of this potential here. But we go back on the GFS run here to the 12Z run, and if it's going to load, if not, then that's fine. But on the 12Z run, it was not as strong. It was further off towards the east. So subsequently, what actually ended up happening, we're going to try to go back to the 12Z model if we can, or not. But subsequently, what actually ends up happening is we do end up getting this ridge to actually abate down here. So that's going to be something that we're going to have to very monitor here over the next several days, is to see just how that actually kind of handles as we sort of progress throughout time. So it is entirely possible that this ridge actually may be stronger, or that this ridge may be in fact weaker, and then subsequently it would end up just kind of falling, and we do in fact end up getting something that doesn't allow for cyclones to, you know, turn back towards land. So there's a lot of discrepancy here in terms of how things actually evolve kind of going forward, and a lot is going to depend on exactly what kind of goes into place over the next several days. And the complicating factor really is the typhoon right now, the typhoons rather, in the Eastern Pacific, or I'm sorry, in the Western Pacific Basin. Those are going to have a pretty big impact on weather in the mid-latitudes in North America, as that and that mid and upper level energy is then going to be transferred into the Atlantic Basin, and then we subsequently have something where we end up getting a, pattern that allows all out to sea. And that's big discrepancies here. Now, for what it's worth here on the Euro model, this is the European, the 12Z run, and you can see again, this is Omar out here, and this is Nana. We get a subsequent kind of phase where the Euro and GFS in this case are in pretty good agreement that we have at least 2 cyclones trying to develop. Now, whether or not these are, fully fledged tropical storms or hurricanes at this point remains to be the big question. We also have another wave coming off of Africa, at the 5-day mark. These waves, it's going to be a big wave train. We also have some piece of energy moving out into the Gulf of Mexico. So again, a lot is going to really matter on the subsequent track and intensity with both of our storms here over the next several days. So we're going to have a lot to watch, because if this does not want to actually develop, we could see these waves just move further eastward or westward and pose no threat, and then develop somewhere out in this vicinity. So either way, things are entirely possible as we kind of go forth with time. And we can kind of see that here in the 12Z run versus the 18Z, how this trough is actually a little bit less organized on the GFS forecast. So there's a lot of discrepancies here at that point in time. And again, a lot is going to depend on what is going to happen several days out from now. And again, the typhoons over the Western Pacific is going to play a major role in determining where things are going to go. Eventually, you notice here on the end of the Euro, all these systems kind of want to turn on out to sea. That would be great news, but you can also kind of see our storm trying to slow down and maybe move more a little bit westernly. And again, this would be, September 12th, but you can kind of see how it's moving a little bit more westernly. And if we do go out here on the model forecast out at, the 240, you can definitely see a west-northwest kind of progression, but we do have the ridge trying to build back in towards the north. So, but, for subsequent sake, the Euro is a lot less aggressive with building a significant ridge of high pressure. And we can even see here on the GFS forecast that the GFS does break down this ridge after 240. This ridge is broken down because yet again we have another trough coming in, etc. Now, as I've kind of attested to before, a lot is going to depend on what actually does occur, because if these waves move quicker, if the ridge is stronger, if the ridge is weaker, if these typhoons in the Western Pacific don't have as much of an impact on the mid and upper latitude air masses of the Atlantic, there's a lot right now that can change between now and even the next 5 days, let alone the next 6, 7, 8, 9 days. So there's a lot of considerable uncertainty regarding the eventual forecast of both of these systems. But either way, we are likely to have multiple tropical cyclones that are likely to be spilled out across the main development region of the Atlantic Basin, but it remains too early to discern whether or not any of them are going to have land impacts. The one thing I will say is you do have to watch every time of this year, because, again, the models are notorious for underestimating the strength of the ridge. We saw it with Laura, Dorian, Irma, etc. We see it time in and time out, so it would not necessarily completely surprise me to see another rendition of that. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but another rendition of when the models don't guess the ridge strength properly, that could be on our tabs right now. But at least for right now, the call to action is just to monitor things. If you live in the islands, if you live in anywhere that's a hurricane prone area, just be mindful that we're going to have an upcoming active phase, but there's a lot that we don't know yet in terms of how strong or where it's going to be or when exactly things are going to start popping off. So there's a lot of time that we have right now between now and even the next 5 days to watch things. But even beyond that, we're going to have a fairly active period upcoming. So it is just something to be mindful of as time goes on, that we're going to have to monitor things and see how that all progresses. All right. So with that being said, I know this is probably a pretty long video, lengthy, discussion on everything, but I kind of want to get that point out that we do have a lot going on right now, and there's going to be a lot to cover here over the next several days. Of course, I am on Patreon, which the links will be down in the description down below, and also at the top right-hand corner of today's video at the very end here when I'm talking about this. But if you guys want to see what we're doing these unmanned live hurricane cameras that will be obviously deployed out in front of landfalling hurricanes. Right now it's a pretty local thing, but as time goes on, obviously this will go bigger and bigger. This is part of a whole ambitious project here that will also kind of be trying to team up with Mark Sudduth and other renowned professionals in the field, and you guys can be a part of it as well if you join the Patreon. Even for $1 a month, your support will be greatly appreciated. All right, with that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of your evening, and I will be back with more for you later tomorrow. Have a great rest of your evening, everyone. Of course, this has been Mike O'Malley. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow morning.